What sounds like fiction but is actually a real historical event. Jack, a baboon who was employed to change rail signals. After initial skepticism, the railway decided to officially employ Jack once his job competency was verified. The baboon was paid 20 cents a day, and a half bottle of beer each week. It is widely reported that in his 9 years of employment with the railroad, Jack never made a mistake. When King Edward I was young, before he was king, he was a prisoner of Simon de Montfort during a civil war. During his captivity he asked to ride the horses at the castle where he was being held. He proceeded to ride them one by one, tiring them all out. When it came to the last horse he mounted, bade his captors farewell and rode away. All of the other horses were too tired to give effective chase. Return of Napoleon. An army was sent to intercept him, and they ended up fighting for him. If it were shown in a movie, most people would have considered it cheesy and unrealistic. In 496 BC, the army of King Gudgeon of Yu put 3 ranks of criminals in the front of their battle formation. Their task was to impress the enemy with their ferocity and commitment by chopping off their own heads as soon as battle was joined. The tactic was a success. While their opponents from the state of Wu were recovering from their astonishment, they were overrun by the rest of the Yu army. The convicts, who were condemned men anyway, had been coerced by the threat that if they didn't comply with this plan their families would be executed also. Stephen Fry on Chi. I think cutting off one's own head is pretty unlikely, but they might have slit their own throats. The Great Stink of London in 1858. One summer the heat dried up the River Thames where all the human waste went, and an unbearable smell pervaded throughout the entire city. All Parliament representatives were eventually coerced out of their homes outside of London to convene and solve the issue. Much to the citizens' glee, Parliament was held in the building on the bank of the River Thames, resulting in one of the fastest Parliament decisions ever made to reform the London sewer system. The London beer flood of 1814, when one vat of beer at Muir and Amp Co. brewery exploded, it proceeded to cause a domino effect of other vats to also burst, causing a tidal wave that flooded a neighborhood, leaving crumbled homes in its path as well as 8 people dead and dozens injured. The many defenestrations of Prague. Starting a war by throwing diplomats out the window is almost straight out of 300. Paddy Roy Bates, the founding king of Sealand, had his country, a small naval platform, invaded and his son Michael taken hostage by Dutch and German mercenaries. They came in riding jet skis, speedboats, and helicopters while he was in England buying groceries. He hired a helicopter, came down a rope with a shotgun, reconquered Sealand and took the mercenaries hostage. An official German diplomat was sent to negotiate the release of the ringleader. The Japanese kamikaze, Divine Wind, that saved the country from an amphibious invasion by the Mongolian hordes. The Mongols captured a foothold on some outlying Japanese islands, and started to attack the mainland. The Japanese army pushed them back, and they had to retreat to China. When they did, a typhoon ravaged their navy and sank their ships. The Mongolians, probably reasonably, seeing this as a fluke, decided to rebuild and attack again. 7 years later, unfortunately for them, the Japanese fortified their coastline. After basically months of sailing around seeking a place to land, another typhoon struck the fleet and destroyed them. There would be no third invasion. The fire in Dublin, Ireland on June 18, 1875. A fire broke out and spread to a malt house, and the heat broke open every alcohol barrel and flooded the streets with it. The people of Dublin decides to drink the burning alcohol that is spreading in the streets, filled with litter and debris, and was literally on fire. 13 people died not from the fire or smoke but from alcohol poisoning they got from drinking the street whiskey. The owner and bartender of a bar once tried to take out an insurance policy on one of their alcoholic customers with one of their friends. In an attempt to make some fast cash, they immediately opened his tab up, hoping he would drink himself to death. That didn't work, so they began spiking his unlimited drinks with antifreeze. That didn't work, so they decided to pump carbon monoxide into his apartment one night. He still wouldn't die. They then beat him savagely and put him in the back of their car to bury him in a rural area. Halfway out there, they heard noises coming from the trunk of the car. He still hadn't died, and when they stopped and got him out, he began walking away under his own power. It took 3 times being hit with a car to finally kill him. That man may be the closest thing we've ever had to a superhero. Edit. Since posting I've been made aware that his name was Michael Malloy. If anyone wants to read further about his story. Some guy in Australia decided he wanted to hunt rabbits, but rabbits don't live in Australia, so then he released like 12 in his backyard, and now there's a ton of rabbits in Australia. Serial killer Carl Panzram broke into the home of former President William H. Taft and stole jewelry, bonds, and a gun. With the money he got from the first 2 he bought a yacht in which he used the gun to kill a bunch of sailors. In the 1800s there were street vendors in Egypt who sold ancient Egyptian mummies. Just lined them up on a street corner and sold them like they were umbrellas on a rainy day. English tourists would buy them to display as oddities. Sky pirates. During World War I, German Zeppelins would board and search foreign ships. And the boarding party of the L-23 once captured the Norwegian three-masted cargo schooner Royal by bluffing the crew with a flare gun after they accidentally dropped their machine gun into the sea while lowering from their airship. The entire Taiping Rebellion, a war started by a Chinese peasant who dreamed and believed he was Jesus's younger brother. Although poor, the first thing he did was have a giant demon-slaying sword forged. Took over a city, asked the British why they wouldn't pay him tribute as the new head of their faith. Engaged in total war with the king. Applied seduo-communist policies like abolishing private property. Separated women and men from ever interacting. And sent the women to the front lines. Over 20 million people died. With some estimates as high as 40 million. It was the fourth deadliest conflict in human history. It killed more people than World War I. Only World War II, transition of the Ming, and ensuing conquest of the Ming were deadlier. During the First World War, navies from different countries hired artists to paint crazy patterns on their ships in order to throw off the aim of enemy U-boats. Ted Bundy escaped from custody twice. The first by jumping out of a 3-story building. Second time by taking a guard's outfit and walking out the front door. A Finnish soldier, who managed to escape capture after losing his squad in a methed-up hallucination. Being the doctor of the group, he was carrying the meth pills for the whole squad. And in order to survive and escape his pursuers, he took the whole pill box. 30 pills, when the allowed dosage for a grown man was 1. He survived in the Soviet wilderness for 2 weeks eating only pine buds and one time a Siberian jay that he caught and ate raw. When he was rescued, he was 45 kilograms and had a resting heart rate of 200 BPM. The Glasgow Ice Cream War. 6 people died in a turf war over ice cream van routes. They were dealing heroin out of the vans. Operation Paul Bunyan. To summarize, some Americans were killed by the North Korean military while cutting down a tree in the Korean DMZ. In response to this, to show the North Koreans that you don't F with the United States, America went back to finish cutting down the tree with a little bit of backup firepower to help keep them safe. Specifically, America and South Korea sent a convoy of 23 vehicles and about 140 men. Armed with rifles, grenade launcher, vehicle-mounted chain guns, chainsaws, some with suicide vests, some with axes and taekwondo training. They had 27 helicopters circling behind them, 7 of which were attack helicopters. They had B-52s flying overhead, escorted or accompanied by F-4s, F-5s, F-86s, and F-111s, all of which were armed and ready to engage. They moved a carrier offshore. Just behind the border, they had full infantry, artillery, and armor divisions standing by. All this, just to chop down a tree, and to send a message, of course. The rise and fall of Alexander the Great. Never lost a battle in his life, conquered the whole known world, and only stopped because his soldiers were tired. There was that time Austrian hussars got some schnapps on their way to attack two Ottomans. Got drunk, and fought their own infantry over access to the schnapps. In the multilingual confusion someone shouted, "The Turks," which caused widespread panic and a full retreat by both the cavalry and infantry. Officers shouting, "Halt," in German sounded to their non-Austrian allies like they were shouting, "Allah," which only deepened the confusion. As they retreated into the rest of the Austrian army, those commanders also thought it was a Turkish attack and ordered artillery to fire into the oncoming men. That was the story of the Austrians routing their own army because of schnapps. Known as the Battle of Karansebes. According to Wikipedia, there are estimates of 1,200 casualties. Operation Starfish Prime reads like science fiction. Back in 1962, USA pondered what would happen if you detonated a nuclear warhead in outer space, so they did just that. The result was an EMP that made the test instruments go off scale, so it was difficult getting accurate measurements. In Hawaii, almost 900 miles away, the EMP knocked out 300 streetlights. After the detonation of Starfish Prime, several bright auroras could be observed. The visible phenomena due to the burst were widespread and quite intense. A very large area of the Pacific was illuminated by the auroral phenomena. From far south of the South Magnetic Conjugate Area, Tongatapu, through the burst area to far north of the North Conjugate Area, French Frigate Shoals. At twilight after the burst, resonant scattering of light from lithium and other debris was observed at Johnston and French Frigate Shoals for many days, confirming the long-time presence of debris in the atmosphere. An interesting side effect was that the Royal New Zealand Air Force was aided in anti-submarine maneuvers by the light from the bomb. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of 2 joining thunderstorms and lifted to an altitude of 10 kilometers. She landed 3-5 hours later about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning and lack of oxygen. The fact that after Napoleon's exile in 1814 he went round France again, rallying all the armies that had been sent to kill him, and declared war on the rest of Europe again. All within 100 days. Edit, waged war, not declared war. A Chinese emperor once ran in circles around a pillar to escape an assassin. He survived. A town in France nearly danced itself to death in 1518 because of a dancing plague. There were a few Japanese soldiers who refused to surrender after World War II and remained on duty in the rainforest for 30 years after the war ended. During World War I, the Germans sent Lenin back to Russia in a SEAL train, calling him the most dangerous weapon that they had. Joe Medicine Crow, recognized as a war chief for services performed in World War II. This required that he touch an enemy without killing him, counting coup. He did this colliding into a German soldier and beating the stuffing out of him. Taking an enemy's weapon, same event. Leading a successful war party, several. But most notable when he stole 50 horses from an SS detachment and rode off on one. Singing all the way, stealing an enemy's horse, see above. During World War II, the Polish army conscripted a bear. Simo Häyhä during the Winter Wars. Dude was straight out of a modern FPS game. He had 505 confirmed kills. So that's just the number they can prove. It may be even more than that. He became known as the White Death since he'd wait in the snow for hours at a time and Russian soldiers would just get shot out of nowhere. The man was absolutely insane. Sort of related, apparently. When Ron Howard had preview screenings of Apollo 13, on at least a couple comment cards were remarks about how the ending was so fake as to be unbelievable, as there was no way those astronauts were surviving that ordeal. The American Air Force shot a bear out of a B-58 while testing ejector seats. The Wright brothers went to the US military to pitch their plane. They were like, a flying machine? Get the F out of here. They did eventually bring 'em round in the end though. In 1504, a German imperial knight lost his hand to a cannon shot which forced his sword against him. He lived. Pretty amazing for that time. And instead of, stopping with fighting and living the rest of his life in peace, he had an iron hand forged. Some Jaime Lannister SH. Let me repeat that. This motherfucker had an iron hand prosthetic over 500 years ago. He continued fighting for 40 years, after which he chilled in the castle of Hornburg for his final years. His name was Gotts of the Iron Hand, and the hand itself is still at display. In 1987, a teenager, 19, from West Germany piloted a small Cessna and flew it into the USSR, without permit of course, all the way to Moscow, where he landed on a bridge next to the Red Square and near the Kremlin. He was one of the catalysts for the fall of the USSR, as the military's failure to shoot him down gave Gorbachev a perfect reason to sack key opponents in the USSR military. During World War I, Christmas 1914, the British and German forces on the Western Front unofficially made a ceasefire without the authorization of their superiors in order to celebrate trade goods and play football. Also during World War I, the Russian and German armies in Poland stopped fighting each other in order to fight off an enormous pack of wolves that had been attacking both armies.